and food, not a few filling up on free stuff. But they serve a purpose, Opal said, her voice slightly sharp. Once people have a taste of the rolls, it makes them hungrier and they order more than they would otherwise.
So those people I saw sitting up here last night, drinking discount beer and eating rolls and nothing else,
my dad replied.
They're the exception.
There were only like 2 people at the bar last night. My dad pointed at her. Exactly. Opal just looked at him, her face flushing red. The truth was, no one looked kindly on their bosses bringing in a hired gun to tell them what they were doing wasn't working. It didn't matter if the place was losing money or had the worst reputation, /food, /bathrooms in town, and any and all improvements would only benefit them. People always complained at the beginning, and usually the senior staff members did it the loudest, which was why Eat Inc. often fired them before we even showed up. For whatever reason, this was different, and therefore difficult. Okay, she said now, her tone even, controlled. So suppose we do away with the rolls then. What will we offer people instead? Pretzels? Peanuts? Maybe they can throw the shells on the floor to add more of that ambiance you're so sure we're lacking. Nope, my dad smiled. I'm thinking pickles, actually. Opal just looked at him. Pickles? She repeated. I watched as he picked up the menu in front of him. It was the same one I'd found on our kitchen table that morning, covered in notes and crossouts in black Sharpie pen. So ravaged it looked like one of my term papers from when I'd taken AP English with Mr. Reed Barber, the hardest teacher in my last school. Based on just a glance, things didn't look promising for most of the entrees and all of the desserts. Now, he slid it between them on the bar, and Opal's eyes widened. She looked so dismayed I couldn't even watch, instead going back to wrestling with the Sudoku puzzle and the paper someone had left behind on the bar. Oh my God, she said, her voice low. You're going to change everything, aren't you? No, my dad said. You've eliminated all our meat dishes, a gasp. And the appetizers, there's like nothing left. Ah, but there is, my dad said, his voice calm. There are the pickles. Opal leaned closer, squinting at the menu. Nobody orders the pickles. Which is unfortunate, my dad said, because they're very good, unique, and incredibly cost-effective. The perfect giveaway starter. You want to give people fried pickles when they come in the door? Opal demanded. We're an Italian place. Which brings me to my next question, my dad said, flipping the menu over. If that's really the case, why are you serving guacamole, tacos, and fajitas? Or pickles, for that matter? She narrowed her eyes at him. I'm sure you already know that the previous owners of this place ran a very successful Mexican restaurant. When the new management came in and changed the menu, it only made sense to keep some of the more popular dishes. I do know that, my dad said, but the average Potts does not. Potts? Person off the street. Your generic customer. The person walking by, looking for a place to try for dinner. He cleared his throat. My point is, this restaurant is in an identity crisis. You don't know what you are, and my job is to help you figure it out. Opal just looked at him. By changing everything, she said. Not everything, he replied, flipping the menu over. Remember, pickles. It wasn't pretty. In fact, by the time they were done and my dad finally came to join me, he looked exhausted. And it wasn't like this was his first time doing this. As for Opal, she disappeared into the kitchen, letting the doors bang loudly behind her. A moment later, something clattered loudly to the floor, followed by an expletive. So, my dad said, pulling out the bar stool beside mine and sliding on. That went well. I smiled, then pushed my plate closer to him so he could help himself to the chips and salsa I hadn't eaten. She likes the rolls, I guess. It's not really about the rolls. He picked up a chip, sniffed it, then put it back down. She's just running a muddle. I raised my eyebrows, surprised. Since the whole Peter Hamilton thing, my dad's love of DeFreeze basketball had waned almost to nothing, which was understandable. But he'd been a fan for so long, the legend and lingo of the team, such a big part of his life, that certain habits were impossible to break. Like invoking McLean Rich's most famous offensive move, which consisted of distracting a team with one pass or play so they wouldn't notice a bigger one happening at the same time, when he thought someone was trying to work it on him. He didn't notice or chose not to acknowledge the slip, though. so I let it pass without comment as well. "She'll come around," I said instead. "You know that first meeting is always the hardest." "True." I watched him run a hand through his hair, letting it flop back over his forehead. He'd always worn it long and somewhat shaggy, which made him look even younger than he was, although the divorce had added a few lines around his eyes. Still, he had the kind of ramshackle good looks that had pretty much guaranteed a new girlfriend, if not wannabe stepmother, in each place we'd landed so far. "So," I said, "ready for the latest update?" He sat back, taking a breath. Then he slapped his hands together and shook them out, his version of a reset, before saying, "Absolutely, hit me." I pulled my list out of my pocket, unfolding it on the bar between us. "Okay," I began. "All the utilities are up and running, except the cable's still not getting half the channels, but that should be fixed by tomorrow. Recycling is on Thursday. Garbage pickup is Tuesday. I can register at the school on Monday morning, just need to bring my transcripts and come early." "And where is that?" "About 6 miles away, but there's a city bus stop, about a block over from us." "Cool," he said. "What about supplies?" "I found a Park Mart and stocked up this morning. The toaster in the kitchen is busted, so I got a new one. Oh, and I got an extra key made." "Met any neighbors yet?" I thought of the boy I'd found on the porch as I picked up my Coke, taking a sip. It wasn't exactly a meeting, though, so I shook my head. "But I'm guessing on the right is a family, professors. On the left, students. I could hear bass thumping all last night." "Me too," he said, rubbing his face again. "Not that I was sleeping anyway." I glanced at the marked-up menu, which was on his other side. "So, pickles, huh?" "You had them yesterday," he said. "They were good, right?" "Better than these tacos. They all fell apart the minute I picked them up." He reached over, taking my fork and helping himself to a bite from my plate. He chewed, his face impassive, before replacing it and saying, "Meat isn't drained enough. That's half the battle on a good taco. Plus, there's too much cilantro in that salsa." "But they still have a loyal following," I reminded him. He shook his head. "Well, I guess they'll be joining up with the bread people." "Viva la revolucion!" I said, just to make him laugh. It worked. Kind of. There was another bang from the kitchen, this one followed by a long series of clattering. He sighed, pushing back from the bar. "Time to meet my kitchen staff," he said, sounding less than enthusiastic. "You gonna be okay on your own tonight?" "Oh, yeah," I said. "I've got a ton of unpacking to do." "Well, call or come back if you get lonely. I'll try to get out of here at a decent hour." I nodded, closing my eyes as he kissed my cheek, then ruffled my hair as he passed behind me. Watching him go, noting his slow gait and how stiff he seemed in his shoulders, I felt that same pang of protectiveness that had become like second nature since the divorce. There was probably a term for it. Some brand of codependence. A daughter acting too much like a wife, once said wife takes off. But what was I supposed to do? We had each other. That was all. My dad could take care of himself. I knew that the same way I knew there were so many things about his life I couldn't fix, no matter how hard I tried. It was probably why I worked so hard to handle the things I did, getting us settled, taking care of details, keeping the chaos we'd chosen as neat as possible. I couldn't mend his broken heart or give him back the love of his team, but getting a new toaster, making sure we had enough soap and paper towels, and agreeing about the pickles, that I could handle. This was especially true now that I didn't know if I'd have a chance to do it again. I was in the second semester of my senior year. My college applications, which had been a challenge to say the least with my patchwork transcript, already submitted. In the fall, like the last two, I knew I'd probably be somewhere else. And again, I didn't know where. What I was sure of, though, was that I would be going it alone. The thought made me sad enough to want to do everything I could now for my dad, as if I could bank it away for my eventual absence. I paid my check. That was another one of my dad's rules. No freebies. Then got up and headed outside for the short walk back to the house. It was a crisp day, early January, with that kind of quickly waning afternoon light that always makes it feel like the dark snuck up on you. I'd cut down the alley just to the left of Luna Blue, which I was pretty sure was a shortcut to our street, when I came upon Opal. She was sitting on a milk crate by the side door of the restaurant, her back to me, talking to a guy in jeans and an apron who was smoking a cigarette. I mean, it takes serious nerve to just come in here and call yourself an expert on any and all things, she was saying. Oh, and you can just tell he's used to women falling all over him and agreeing to everything he says, even when it's stupid, bordering on offensive. The man is clearly in love with himself. I mean, did you see that hair? What kind of grown adult can't get a simple, age-appropriate haircut? The guy with the cigarette, who was tall and skinny with a seriously protruding Adam's apple, let out a guffaw, nodding at me as I approached. Opal turned, laughing too. Then her eyes widened and she jumped to her feet. "Hi," she said too quickly. I didn't realize. How was your meal? Good?" I nodded, silent, then slid my hands farther into my pockets as I walked between them. About 2 beats later, I heard footsteps behind me, running to catch up. "Wait," Opal called out. Then, "Please?" I stopped, turning to face her. Up close, I realized she was older than I'd first realized. Probably in her early 30s rather than 20s. Her cheeks were flushed, either from the cold or being embarrassed, as she said, "Look, I was just blowing off steam, okay? It's not personal." "It's fine," I told her. "It has nothing to do with me." She looked at me for a moment, then folded her arms over her chest. "It's just," she said, then stopped, taking a breath. "It's kind of jarring to suddenly be under scrutiny like this. I know it's not an excuse, but I'd appreciate it if you wouldn't, "I wouldn't," I told her. Opal nodded slowly. "Thanks." I turned and started walking again, ducking my head against the cold. I'd only taken a couple of steps when I heard her say, "Hey, I didn't catch your name earlier. What was it again?" I never picked the moment. It always chose me. I just knew somehow what would work at the exact instant that I needed it to. "I'm Liz," I said, turning back to her. I liked the sound of it. Simple, 3 letters. "Liz," she repeated, sealing the deal. "It's nice to meet you." Back at the house, I unpacked my suitcase, finished putting away the groceries, and moved our couch 4 places in the living room before deciding it looked best in the very spot my dad and I had unceremoniously dropped it the day before when we brought it in from the U-Haul. Just to be sure, though, I plopped down on it with a glass of milk and booted up my laptop. My homepage was still set to my last Yumi.com homepage, the one for Beth's suite. At the top was a picture of me, taken on the beach, our bungalow a pink and green blur behind me. There was my list of activities: yearbook, volunteering, student council, and interests. Travel, reading, hanging with my friends. Said friends were just below. All 142 of them. Face after tiny face I would most likely never see again. I scrolled down to my comment section, scanning the handful of new ones there. "Girl, we miss you already. The last board meeting sucked without you." "Beth, I heard from Misty you moved. Awful short notice. Hope you're okay. Call me." What happened to goodbye? I leaned a little closer to the screen, reading these 4 words again and once more. Then, against my better judgment, I clicked on the face beside them, bringing up Michael's page. There he was, sitting on the seawall in his wetsuit, his hair wet and wicking up in the back. He was looking to the right at the ocean, not the camera, and seeing him I felt that same little nervous tug in my stomach. We'd only known each other a couple of months since meeting on the beach one morning when I was taking a walk and he was out catching early swells. I spent 6:45 to 7:15 with him for weeks, working up to, nothing, as it turned out. But he was right. I hadn't said goodbye. It had been easier, like always, to just disappear, sparing myself the messy details of another farewell. Now my fingers hovered over my trackpad, moving the cursor down to his comment section before I stopped myself. What was the point? Anything I said now would only be an afterthought. In truth, since my parents split, I hadn't had much faith in relationships and even less of an inclination to start any lasting ones of my own. At home, I'd had several friends I'd known since grade school, girls I'd played rainbow soccer with and stuck close to in middle school. I'd had a couple of boyfriends and gotten my heart broken more than once. I was a normal girl in a normal town until the divorce happened. Then, suddenly, I wasn't just one of the group anymore. No one else had a coach for a stepdad, a scandal at home, and new siblings on the way as an aftermath. It was all so public and awful, and while my friends tried to be there for me, it was too difficult to explain what was going on. So I pulled back from everything and everyone I'd known. It hadn't been until we got to Petrie that I realized I'd been changing even before we started moving, that my reinvention began when I was still in the most familiar of places. Once the setting was totally new, though, I finally could be, as well. Since we'd been moving, I'd gotten smart about dealing with people. I knew I wouldn't be staying forever, so I kept my feelings at the temporary stage, too. Which meant making friends easily, but never taking sides and picking guys I knew wouldn't last for the long haul. Or any haul at all, for that matter. My best relationships, in fact, usually started when I knew we were about to move to a new place. Then I could just go all in and totally relax, knowing that whatever happened, I could cut and run. It was why I'd started hanging out with Michael, a boy who was older, out of school, and with whom I could never have had any sort of future. That way, when I didn't, it was no surprise. I clicked back to Beth Sweet's page, then signed out. Be the you and you me, the subsequent page read. Sign up for your new account now. I was just typing my email address and Liz Sweet when my computer made a cheerful beeping noise and my webcam activated itself. Crap, I thought, quickly putting down my laptop on the coffee table and darting into the kitchen. Hi there, the video chat application had come preloaded on my computer, and no matter what I did, I couldn't seem to disable it. Which shouldn't have been an issue, really, as none of my friends used it anyway. Unfortunately, someone else did. McLean. A pause. Some static. Honey, are you there? I leaned against the fridge, closing my eyes as my mother's voice, pleading, drifted through our empty house. This was her last resort after I'd ignored her messages and emails, the one way she still, somehow, was always able to track me down. Well, she said now. And I knew that if I looked at my screen, I'd see her there, craning her neck, looking around for my face in yet another room she didn't recognize. I guess you're not home. I just had a free moment. Wanted to say hello. I miss you, honey. And I was thinking about your applications. If you'd heard anything and how if you end up here at DeFreeze, we can... This thought was interrupted by a sudden shriek, followed by another, then babbling in what sounded like a struggle before she spoke again. Okay, you can sit in my lap, but be careful of the computer. Connor, what did I just say? More muffled noises. Madison, honey, look in the camera. Look there. See? Can you say hi to McLean? Say hi, McLean. Hi, Big. Connor, give me that pencil. Honestly, both of you, just... I pushed off the fridge, then out the kitchen door onto the deck. Outside, the air was cold, the sky clear, and I just stood there, looking at that basketball goal, her voice finally muffled behind me. From where I was standing, I had a partial view of the dining room of the house next door, where a woman with short, frizzy hair wearing a plaid sweater and glasses was sitting at the head of the table. There was an empty plate in front of her, the fork and knife crossed neatly across its center. To her left was a man I assumed to be her husband, tall and skinny, also with glasses, drinking a glass of milk. Their faces were serious, both of them focused on whoever was sitting at the other end. All I could see, though, was a shadow. I went back inside, pausing in the kitchen to listen. There was only silence and the fridge whirring, but I still approached my laptop with caution, creeping around to the front and peeking over to make sure there was only the screensaver in view before I sat down again. As I expected, there was a hi there message bubble, bouncing cheerfully from side to side as it waited for me. Wanted to say hello. Sorry we missed you. We will be home all night. Call and tell us about your new place. I love you. Mom. My mother was like Teflon. I swear to God. I could tell her 1,000,000 times I didn't want to talk to her right now and needed some space, but it made no difference to her whatsoever. As far as she was concerned, I wasn't furious, choosing to avoid her. I was just busy. I shut my laptop, having lost any momentum I had to tackle a new Yumi.com account. Then I sat back, looking at the ceiling. A beat later, bass began thumping again from the other side of the house. I stood up, then walked down the hallway and into my room. From my bed, I had a perfect view over the hedge to the small white house on our right. There were still several cars parked in the yard, and now I watched as an SUV pulled in beside them, bumping up on the curb and almost sideswiping the mailbox. A moment later, the tailgate opened and a beefy-looking guy in a pea coat hopped out from behind the wheel. He whistled through his fingers, a skill I'd always admired, I went around to the back of the car, pulling at something as another couple of guys spilled out from the house's front door to join him. A moment later, they were carrying a keg up the front steps. When they came through the door, someone cheered from inside. Once the door shut behind them, the bass got even louder. I looked up the street in the direction of Luna Blue, wondering if I should take my dad up on his offer and go hang out there. But it was cold and I was tired, and it wasn't like I really knew anyone there either. So instead, I went back to the kitchen. In the other neighbor's house, the couple had moved from the table into the kitchen, where the woman in plaid was now standing by the sink while her husband ran the water and piled in a couple of plates. As she spoke, she kept glancing at the back door, shaking her head, and after a moment he reached over a dripping hand, squeezing her shoulder. She leaned into him, her head against his chest, and they stood there together as he kept scrubbing. It was a study in contrast, to be sure, like a choice I could make, one story or another. The rowdy college kids, their evening just beginning, the middle-aged couple whose night was coming to an end. I went back to the couch where I stretched out, this time making sure to turn my laptop away from me first. I stared up at the ceiling for a little while, feeling that bass vibrating softly beneath me. Thump, thump, drip, drip. It was kind of soothing, these sounds of lives being lived all around me, for better or for worse. And there I was, in the middle of them all, newly reborn and still waiting for mine to begin. I awoke with a start at the sound of a crash. I sat up, blinking, not knowing where I was at first. This was common in the initial days at new houses, so I didn't panic as much as I once had. Still, it took a minute to get my bearings and calm my pounding heart before I felt ready to get off the couch and go investigate. It did not take long to find the source of the noise. On the edge of our front porch, a flower pot was broken into pieces, dirt spilling out in all directions. The likely culprit, a heavy-set guy in a UT shirt and some Mardi Gras beads, was stumbling back in the direction of the party next door, while a group of people on the porch there applauded, laughing. "Uh-oh!" a skinny guy in a parka yelled at him, pointing in my direction. "Watch out, Grass, you're busted!" The big guy turned sloppily and looked at me. "Sorry," he called out cheerfully. "You're cool though, right?" I wasn't sure exactly what this meant, other than I was probably going to be needing a broom and a trash bag. Before I could answer, though, a red-headed girl in a puffy jacket walked out into the side yard between our two houses, holding a beer. She popped the cap, then handed it to him and whispered something in his ear. A moment later, he was coming back my way, holding it out like a peace offering. "For you," he said, doing a weird, almost curtsy and practically falling down in the process. Someone hooted from behind him. "My lady." More laughter. I reached out, taking the can, but didn't respond. "See?" he said, pointing at me. "I knew it. Cool." So I was cool. Apparently. I watched him make his way back to his friends, pushing through the pack and going back inside. I was about to pour the beer into the bushes and go look for that trash bag when I thought of the house on the other side, with the sad older couple, and reconsidered. My names always chose me, and what followed were always the details of the girl who would have that name, whoever she was. Beth, or Lisbeth, or Eliza wouldn't ever have considered joining a party of strangers. But Liz Sweet might be just that kind of girl. So I ducked back inside, grabbed my jacket, and went to find out. "Jackson High?" The blonde at the keg rolled her eyes, sighing dramatically. "You poor thing. You'll hate it." "It's a prison," added her boyfriend, who was in a black t-shirt and trench coat, sporting a hoop hanging from both nostrils. "Like the gulag, but with bells." "Really?" I said, taking a tiny sip off my beer. "Totally." The girl, who was small and curvy, wearing the meteorologically incongruous outfit of slip dress, sheepskin boots, and heavy parka, adjusted her ample cleavage. "The only way to survive is with a deep sense of irony and good friends. Without either of those, you're screwed." I nodded, not saying anything. We were in the kitchen of the White House, where I'd ended up after making my way through the crowds packed on the porch and in the living room. Judging by the decor, basketball stickers covering the fridge, stolen street signs on the walls, the residents were college students, although many in the assembled crowd were my age. In the kitchen, there wasn't much except the keg, which had crumpled cups all around it, and a beat-up table and chairs. The only other decor was a row of paper grocery bags overflowing with beer cartons and pizza boxes, and a cardboard cutout of a bodybuilder holding an energy drink. Someone had drawn a beard on his face, big nipples on his chest, and something I didn't even want to look too closely at on his nether regions. Nice. "If I were you," the blonde advised as another group of people came in from the side door, bringing a burst of cold and noise with them, "I'd beg my parents to enroll me in the Fountain School." "The Fountain School?" I said. "It's like this totally free-form alternative charter school," the guy in the trench explained. "You can take meditation for gym, and all the teachers are old hippies. No bells there, man. They play a flute to recommend you switch classes." I didn't know what to say to this. "I loved the Fountain School," the blonde sighed, taking a swig off her beer. "You went there?" I asked her. "We met there," the guy said, sliding his arm around her waist. She snuggled into him, pulling her parka closer around her skimpy dress. "But then there was this, total Big Brother-style shakedown, and she got kicked out." "All that talk about respecting others and their choices," the girl said. "And they have the nerve to search my purse for drugs. I mean, what is that?" "You did pass out in the trust circle," the guy pointed out. "The trust circle," she said. "Where is the trust in that?" I glanced around, thinking it might be time to look for other conversation options. The only other people in the kitchen, though, were two guys taking tequila shots and a girl leaning against the fridge having a weepy drunk conversation on her cell phone. Unless I wanted to go outside, I was stuck. The door banged open again behind me, and I felt another burst of cold air. A moment later, the girl in the puffy jacket who'd been responsible for me getting my beer was stepping up beside me, pulling a bottled water out of her pocket and twisting the top off. "Hey, Riley," the girl in the slip dress said to her. She cocked a thumb at me. "She's new. Starts Jackson on Monday." Riley was thin, with blue eyes, her hair pulled back into a ponytail at the base of her neck, and she had silver rings on almost every finger. She smiled at me sympathetically and said, "It's not as bad as they've told you. I promise." "Don't listen to her. She's a misguided optimist," the guy said. To her, he added, "Hey, you seen Dave yet?" She shook her head. "He was having a big sit-down with his parents tonight. I'm thinking they maybe didn't let him out after." "Another sit-down?" the blonde said. "Those people sure can meet, can't they?" Riley shrugged, taking a sip of her water. Her lipstick, a bright pink, left a perfect half-moon on the bottleneck. "I think he was hoping they decided to loosen up a bit," she said. "I mean, it's been 2 months. The fact that he's not here, though, doesn't bode well." "His parents are so overprotective," the blonde explained to me. "It's crazy." "Like the gulag," her boyfriend added. "But at home. Seriously, the kid is on the straight and narrow his entire life, and then one night he's just unlucky enough to get busted with a beer at a party." The blonde did a combo cleavage adjustment eye roll, a move it was clear she'd perfected. "It was one beer. Even the court just gave him community service. But in their eyes, he might as well have killed someone's grandma or something." "Hardcore," her boyfriend agreed. I watched as Riley took another sip, then consulted her watch. As she did so, I noticed she had a tattoo on her inner left wrist, a simple black outline of a circle the size of a dime. "Okay," she said. "It's 9:40. We leave here at 10:30 at the latest in order to make curfew. No exceptions, no disappearing, capiche?" "You're such a mom," the blonde complained. Riley just looked at her. "Capiche," she said finally. 10:30, the guy said, then saluted her. "Got it." Riley gave me a smile, then walked back into the living room, picking her way over to the sofa. There, a dark-haired guy in an army jacket was gesturing wildly, telling a story to a couple of girls gripping plastic cups, who looked to be hanging on his every word. I watched her as she sat down on his other side, tucking a piece of hair behind her ear, and listened as well. When I turned back to Gulag Guy and trust issues, I found them suddenly and passionately making out, his hands sliding under her jacket. I glanced at the girl at the fridge, still weeping, and decided to head outside for some air. On the side porch, people were smoking and shifting around in an effort to stay warm. It was a cold, crisp night, the stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. Without even thinking about it, I started looking. 1, I thought, as I found Cassiopeia. 2 was Orion. 3, the Big Dipper. Some people step over cracks, knock on wood, or toss salt over their shoulders. I never let myself look up at the night sky without finding at least 3 constellations. It just made me feel safer, more centered. Like no matter where I was, I could find something I recognized. It was my mom who had taught me about the stars. She'd been an astronomy minor in college, one of the many surprises about her, actually, and my dad had bought her a telescope for their 5-year wedding anniversary. She kept it on the small deck outside their bedroom, and on clear nights we'd huddle around it together, her finding the constellations and then pointing them out to me. 1, she'd say, and point to the Little Dipper. 2, I'd say, and find one of my own. Then we'd both look hard as we could for another. Whoever found and named it first was the winner. Because of this, whenever I saw the night sky, no matter where I was reminded of my mom. I wondered sometimes if when she looked up, she thought of me as well. Whoa, I thought as I felt a lump rise in my throat. Where did that come from? I'd only had about 4 sips of beer, but clearly that was enough to threaten entirely too much nostalgia. I was just setting my can down when I saw the blue lights. "Cops!" a voice yelled from behind me, and suddenly everyone under the age of 21 was in motion. People from inside came bursting out the door, while those on the deck jumped the rails or pounded down the steps, taking off across the lawn into the darkness. I saw a couple of people dart across my porch and around the other side to the driveway, while still others took off down the street, their purses and jackets flapping behind them. One skinny girl with braids wearing earmuffs was not so lucky, getting corralled by an officer who was coming up the walk. I watched as he led her by the arm to his car, depositing her in the back seat. There, she slumped against the opposite window, putting her head in her hands. "You!" A bright light flashed across me, then slid back right into my eyes, making everything invisible beyond it. "Stay right there!" My heart started pounding, my face suddenly flushed despite the cold. As the light grew brighter, closer, shaking slightly with every step the cop took toward me, I had to make a choice. McLean, Eliza, Lisbeth, and Beth all would have remained still, following orders, but not Liz Sweet. She bolted. Without even thinking, I ran down the deck stairs, hit the grass, and started across the muddy, frozen backyard. The light and the cop followed me, catching an arm here, a foot there. When I reached the thick row of bushes that marked the beginning of my own yard, he yelled at me to freeze or else. Instead, I plunged through them head first, crashing out the other side. I landed on the grass, then immediately sprang to my feet to keep running. "Hey!" the cop bellowed as the bushes began to rustle, the flashlight dancing above them. "If you know what's good for you, you'll stop right where you are, now!" I knew I should do just that. He was close behind me, and I'd never make it to my house before the light hit me again. But in my panic, I scrambled forward anyway, even as I heard him coming through. I took one running step and another, then I suddenly felt a hand close around my left arm and yank me sideways. Before I even knew what was happening, I tumbled over a low wall on my left and was falling again. This time, though, I landed not on something, but someone. "Oomph," whoever it was said, as together we toppled down what felt like a flight of stairs, although it was suddenly too dark to say for sure. A second later, I heard footsteps, scrambling, and then there were 2 bangs like doors slamming shut. Wherever I'd landed, the bottom was flat and everything smelled like dirt. Plus, it was dark. Really dark. "What the?" I said, but that was all I managed before I was shushed. "1 sec, a voice said. "Just let him get by." A beat later, I heard it. A thump, thump, thump noise, slowly growing louder from overhead. As it grew closer, a yellow light appeared. When I looked up, I could see it, spilling through the cracks between what was, in fact, 2 shut doors above us. "Damn it," I heard someone say over a few huffs and puffs. Suddenly the doors rattled, rising up slowly before being dropped back down with a thud. Then the light was retreating back the way it came. In the silence that followed, I just sat there, trying to catch up with everything that had just happened. Sleep, crashing flower pot, beer sips, gulag, blue lights, and now what? It occurred to me I should probably be nervous, as I was not only underground, but also not alone. And yet, for some reason, there was an odd calmness around me, a sort of familiarity, even in the midst of all this strangeness. It was the weirdest feeling. I'd never experienced anything like it. "I'm going to turn on a light," the voice said. "Don't freak." Of all the things to say to someone you've just pulled down into some dark place with you, this was probably the worst. And yet, a second later, when there was a soft click and a flashlight popped on, I was not at all surprised to see my neighbor, the porch crasher, sitting beside me in jeans and a thick plaid shirt, a knit cap pulled down tight over his long hair. We were at the bottom of a short flight of stairs that led up to a set of doors latched with a hook-and-eye closure. "Hi," he said, all casual, like we were meeting under the most normal of circumstances. "I'm Dave." In the last few years, as I'd been traveling with my dad, I'd had my share of new experiences. Different schools, various kinds of cultures, all new friends. But within 5 minutes, it became clear that never in my life had I ever met anyone like Dave Wade. "Sorry if I startled you," he said, as I sat there open-mouthed staring at him. "But I figured it's better to be surprised than busted." I couldn't respond at first, too distracted by my surroundings. We were in what appeared to be a basement, a small space with wooden plank walls and a dirt floor. A single worn lawn chair took up most of the square footage. A stack of books was beside it, another flashlight propped on top. "What is this place?" I said. "Storm cellar," he replied, as if this was, of course, the first question you'd ask after someone pulled you underground. "For tornadoes and such." "This is yours?" He shook his head, reaching to put the flashlight on the ground between us. As he did so, a moth fluttered past, casting weird shadows. "It's part of the house behind mine. Nobody's lived here for years." "How'd you know about it?" "I found it when I was younger. You know, exploring." "Exploring," I repeated. He shrugged. "I was a weird kid." This I believed. And yet, again, I was struck by the fact that not once during this entire incident had I been scared. At least not by him, even before I knew who he was. "So you just hang out here?" "Sometimes." He got up, brushing himself off, and sat down in the chair which creaked. "When I'm not crashing on your back porch." "Yeah," I said as he sat back, crossing his legs. "What, do you not like being at home or something?" He looked at me for a second, as if weighing his response. "Or something," he said. I nodded. The digging and going underground might have been kind of weird, but this, I understood. "Look," he said, "I didn't mean to freak you out. I was just coming out and saw the lights, then heard you coming. Actually, grabbing you is kind of an impulse move." I looked up at the doors again. "You have good instincts, I guess. You know what's weird, though? I just put that hook and eye in last week. Lucky thing." He squinted up at it, then turned back to me. "The bottom line is, you don't want to get arrested for drinking underage. It's not fun. I know from experience." "How do you know I haven't been already?" I asked. He studied me. All seriousness. "You don't look like the type." "Neither do you," I pointed out. "This is true." He thought for a moment. "I rescind my earlier statement. You could very well be a delinquent just like me." I looked below me again, taking in the small, tidy space. "This doesn't really look like a den for delinquents." "No?" I shook my head. "What were you thinking? Junior League?" I made a face, then nodded at the stack of books. In the throne light, I could barely make out one of the spines, which said something about abstract geometry and physics. "That's pretty heavy reading material." "Don't go by that," he said. "I just needed something to prop the flashlight on." From above us, I heard a sudden burst of music. The cops, apparently, were gone, and the party was starting up again with whatever legal stragglers remained. Dave got up, climbing the stairs, and popped the hook, then slowly pushed open one of the doors overhead and stuck his head out. Watching from below, it occurred to me he looked younger somehow. I could easily picture him as an 8 or 9-year-old digging tunnels in the same backyard. "Coast is clear," he reported, letting the door drop fully open, hitting the ground with a thud. "You should be able to get home now." "I hope so," I said, "since it's only like 14 feet 7.2 inches to your back deck," he finished for me. I raised my eyebrows, and he sighed. "I told you. Weird kid." "Just kid?" Now he smiled. Watch your step. He climbed up the stairs, out onto the grass, then turned the light back on me as I followed him out, offering his hand as I neared the top. I took it, again feeling not strange at all, his fingers closing around mine, supporting me as I stepped up into the world again. Your friends were at the party, I said. They were looking for you. Yeah, it's already been kind of a long night, though. No kidding. I slid my hands in my pockets. Well, thanks for the rescue. It was nothing, he replied. You kinda saved my ass, I pointed out. Just being neighborly. I smiled, then turned to cross those 14 feet, 7.2 inches back to my house. I'd only taken a couple of steps when he said, Hey, if I saved your ass, you should tell me your name. I'd been in this place many times in the last 2 years, not to mention once already today. The name I'd chosen, the girl I'd decided to be here, was poised on the tip of my tongue. But in that place, at that moment, something happened. Like that quick trip below the surface had changed not only the trajectory of my life here, but maybe me as well. McLean, I said. He nodded. Nice to meet you. You too. I could hear the music from the party, that same bass thumping as I crossed to the deck. As I pulled open my side door, I glanced back, just in time to see him climbing back down the stairs, the flashlight's glow rising up around him. I went into my house, kicking off my shoes and padding down the hallway to the bathroom. When I turned on the light, the brightness startled me, as did the faint dusting of dirt that covered my face. Like I too had been